you very much for joining me in this special panel where we are looking into how we can liberalize trade in Africa, that is intra-Africa trade. So as I've highlighted earlier that I have a very interesting story around the insect, which is the Mopane worm, which was actually discussed by Barry York, and also Kamuti also talked about it. When I say this worm is still owing me free time, is that it actually paid my school fees. So how did it do this? Every weekend, I couldn't go and play with other kids when I was young. So what I did is we go and harvest it so that we sell. So we'll fill buckets and sacks, a lot of them. And then my mom will take them and cross to Botswana and sell them. When she sells them there, she'll actually bring back different materials. It could be blades, cups, etc., and sell them back to our community. So I'm talking like this because this was intra-Africa trade happening on its own. And if you look into these products, they're currently existing all over, moving across these countries. So if you look into the AfTA, which is the African Free Trade Agreement, do you think there are opportunities to look into all these different wildlife products and actually open up the market for intra-movement of goods? Should I start with you, David?
Yes, thanks. Well, a very challenging topic. Whenever I hear the word free trade, I wonder whose free trade it is. And I guess I'm thinking of timber trade at the moment, because this is probably one of the most valuable commodities on the continent. And yet I would say that most of the value is accrued not to Africa, but elsewhere in the world. And I think for us to benefit from that, the countries that have these resources, and of course in Southern Africa we have a lot of resources, of course Central and West Africa has even more. But I think unless and until we have value addition accruing to Africa, I think we are missing a trick. And this is something that we need to remedy straight away. Now, I know certain countries like Mozambique have tried to impose certain rules about processing in the country, but you still very often find some of those traders, very often overseas based, that will find a way around those processing parameters and still manage to export it for processing overseas. Now, of course, that's done for a reason, in that many international countries have industries that are very much larger than Africa's. They have an established infrastructure, and they're simply trying to feed that industrial mechanism. And Africa doesn't have that level of industrialization. Well, am I saying that we should have that level? Well, I think we need to find imaginative ways of trying to bring that value back to the continent. And on that note, I'd like to go back to I think probably most people have forgotten it. It's one of these little parts of CITES. Hidden on the appendices is an Appendix 2 listed Hoodia species. And this was an attempt by Namibia a number of years ago to try and increase the amount of income for Namibia out of this product, which at the time was claimed to be a weight loss commodity. And they were trying to add value to it by manufacturing medicines. And they were trying to use the appendices almost as a type of certification system. And based on the listing, the countries were then given permission, and you can still see it in the appendices today, that if the countries like South Africa or Namibia managed that industry correctly, they could export it without any CITES permits, simply with a certificate on each bottle. Now, to my knowledge, that has never been used. But I think experiments like that are really worthwhile to attempt. And I've heard a lot of negativity about CITES, and I understand the reasons for it. But I think it's also a convention that is open to this experimentation. I think we must come up with ideas that allow us to generate greater free trade, well, value addition for ourselves in Africa, and then, of course, free trade within the region, opening up markets where these sustainable practices are used. Maybe I should just end there, because then we get into the world of non-detriment findings and what the African Union thinks about that and so on. But another topic.
Thank you very much, David, for that. I have a question as a follow-up question on that. But before I come back to you, I want to quickly come to Biandri. Biandri, I know that you have done quite a lot of work around intra-Africa trade, looking into non-tariff barriers. So we are specifically focusing on game meat. But I would like to understand a bit more, or if you can unpack for us, what are the issues? What is it that is actually preventing the movement, and how does the situation look like?
Wiseman, I'm unfortunately not very optimistic about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, largely because not much has changed. It's very similar in wording and content to agreements that we already have. The World Trade Organization and its various annexes, the SADC agreement, its various annexes, ECOWAS, you name it. We've got agreements that already regulate this. What we don't have is application. What we don't have is clarity, and we still don't have those things. So my concerns with wild meat are almost exactly the same as my concerns with livestock and meat from farming, with a few exceptions. I mean, there are a couple of things that make wild meat particularly difficult, and this surrounds harvesting mostly. Challenges that I've already mentioned this morning with the insects are things like harmonized tariff classification. Now, I focus on health, so why do I care about tariffs? For me, it's about certainty. So it's about knowing what is moving across borders. When each country has the ability to further define the product that's coming in. So let's say something comes in under a 6-digit code, which is universally recognized as identifying meat. You can further to 8 numbers, or 8 digits, or to 10, define that product. So when you look in your trade statistics, you've got a better idea of what was imported and what was exported. So rather than knowing, a couple of thousand animals came in alive with cloven hooves, you can say, okay, they were, with this type of horn, or however it is, you further identify them into broader categories. And that's not going to change just by having a new agreement. There's a lot of responsibility that still lies on the very same governments that have now signed these new agreements, but not anything has really changed. So I am less optimistic. So as from a non-tariff barrier point of view, it's also things like complaints about permits taking months to issue when really you need to have a quick turnaround time. You're talking about animals, you're talking about perishable products, that type of thing, waiting 6 months or waiting 6 weeks even, when it's something that really there should be administrative capacity to deal with this, and only deal with what is asked, as opposed to more documents than what are required for safe trade to happen, or for sensible trade to happen, is a very big challenge. And then, arriving at a border post by bridge is a notorious border post. When it comes to requiring extra documentation that is legally not really required, it's not one of the the requirements listed. But then you've got the option. You can either find that document, or you cannot move your product across the border. So non-tariff barriers like that are not changing because we've got new agreements. And that is my concern with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is nothing's changing because not really much has changed. So we can reduce tariffs down to 0 all we like. Non-tariff barriers require a much more concerted effort to change, and that is why I'm generally an optimist, I promise. But when it comes to this particular agreement, and especially in sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which is where I operate, my outlook is a bit skeptical of a lot of the estimates that we have. If it's not possible to already control illegal movement across borders of much higher value products than meat, why would meat be controlled?
Okay, thank you very much, Biandri, for that. I think I would want to ask you a bit more and say, what measures do you think we need to do? But you will respond to that. But because this session is a bit shorter, I'll want the audience to also comment. May I also have questions coming from the online speakers? If you can bring them over, then that would be appreciated. Thank you. Mbaiwa, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yes, coming from Botswana, or should I say working from Botswana, you are also in the Khaza area, or Botswana shares the borders of animals with Zimbabwe, Namibia, and also. Do you think these transfrontier boundaries or areas are an opportunity for inter-Africa trade? How can we capitalize or utilize the existing movement of animals between, across these countries in the transfrontier boundaries? Do you think we can leverage on that to achieve inter-Africa trade?
Oh yes, actually Khaza presents a very big opportunity for the region to promote trade. But the problem with Khaza is that much has not been done yet. Of course, we do have a secretariat based in Kasani, but they haven't done much. But you look at the animals, like you are saying, the animals are in Botswana, they move into Namibia, into Angola, into Zambia, into Zimbabwe. That's a very big opportunity. A big opportunity in the sense that you look at the population in the area, the communities which are living in the area. That's a big opportunity for them. You bring in these communities into community-based tourism to benefit from the movement of these animals. What needs to be done there? We need to have some agreements of some sort. Of course, I know there are some SADC protocols, but you also need those regional kind of protocols between these countries to say, this is what we want to do in order to benefit, not only for the beneficiation, even for the protection of these animals, to say, this is what we need to do. You were talking earlier about the Mopani worm from, is it Zimbabwe to Botswana? Zimbabwe to Botswana. We also have Mopani worm from Botswana to South Africa. And you look at what is happening between Zimbabwe and Botswana, Zambia and Botswana. What is happening is that the Mopani worm is transported in those big bags you were talking about. But in South Africa, the moment they get into South Africa, there is a canning of the Mopani worm. You'll find Mopani worm in cans. The marketing, the packaging is good. Why can't we do the same to promote trade between these countries? Mopani worm, we eat Mopani worm in Botswana. It's a very good delicacy, very good food for all of us. And because people value it so much like that, why can't it be packaged and have it being sold in Zambia, sold in Zimbabwe, sold in Namibia, even in South Africa? I'm told in South Africa is animal feed. I don't know whether it's true or not. But what I'm saying is, it's a good example of a product that can promote trade between the Khaza region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you are touching on my story, but it's not about me. So I need to hear more about what they have to say. Do we have questions now from the back? That from the online audience? I think they've been forgotten. So they've been raising a lot of questions. So you talk about protocols that we need to develop to actually look into how we can facilitate intra-Africa trade. We also see that there is a movement to ban, or there is a movement of anti-use rising globally also. Especially from outside. If you look, for example, in the UK, the attempt to ban the trophy. So as Africans, do you think we have an opportunity to maybe start to consider trading amongst ourselves? And how can that be achieved? Do you want to respond to that? And then I'll take the questions from the floor.
Yes, well, it's a good good question. I think I'm just thinking again of another industry that has arisen on the continent, the abalone industry. Of course, this is a marine snail, and it's an industry we've been tracking for many years. And we've always found that many of the so-called illegal trade routes would be through neighboring countries, so Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. And those were always what we would call conduit routes, and the main destination being China, Hong Kong specifically. But recently we've found that people have started to consume this marine snail in those countries, in those transit countries. And so of its own accord, this industry seems to be developing into its own homegrown industry. But interestingly, of course, I think most of those countries don't understand that it's coming from an industry in South Africa that's regarded as highly illegal. And so what do? Do we throw more law enforcement effort at this, or do we find a way where we work with the so-called poachers and we turn this into a legal industry that is properly managed and accessed, and possibly this is another certification option? So yes, that is an example of inter-African trade that is evolving of its own accord.
Fantastic. Biandri, I see you want to add on to that.
Yeah.
And then we can take hands from the audience who wants to comment on what they've presented. Biandri?
I want to ask, it's a question that I'm asking really, is why aren't we trading with other African countries? Because like I said, it's not like agreements regionally or within the continent don't exist. And again, in my opinion, it comes back largely to non-tariff barriers, but certainty. So I don't know if you've ever tried to export an agricultural product out of South Africa, but getting certainty from government about what documents you need to get the required permits. It's largely understandable why it's easier exporting to the EU or to China than to Zimbabwe or to Botswana or to wherever it might be. So uncertainty is not a difficult thing to sort out, but also science-based decisions. So I'm very critical of how a lot of our guidelines, our protocols and that kind of thing are developed and where they're stored, because transparency is a really big issue. In research that I did years back in the red meat industry, my problem was trying to get hold of the protocols that exist for whatever it might be, the slaughter of cattle, that kind of thing. And these are much more mainstream products than what wildlife products are. So if the problem already exists to that extent in agriculture, which is mainstream, which is dominant, it's not really at all surprising that it's a big problem in wildlife. And why I said earlier as well that I don't think these are two separate things to sort out. If there's certainty in one, there can be certainty in the other. But I don't know if there are measures as such that sort that out. That is each individual government's own responsibility. And then the problem of cross mandates across departments, to me, is another problem. So if you're exporting a product that requires one piece of paper from this department, another one from that department, you can understand why it takes weeks to get, or you don't have the correct email address. Our government websites really are quite deficient in terms of transparency, information, up-to-date documents available. So those are very doable solutions that don't require new agreements.
So those are the easy wins. I see there is a hand from Mareth, and then come to Marco, and then also there's another hand there. Mareth, can you read the question from the online, and then I'll come to Marco, and then you can respond.
Wiseman, he's actually coming in live to just make a comment.
Okay,
So we'll get him on the screen now.
You can come in live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nomathemba Langa, and I'm the Managing Director of Inyama Yethu here in South Africa. And my comment is just to you, Andre. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but it is addressing you in terms of you saying that you're not optimistic in terms of the whole free trade agreement, including the meat. And I'm saying to you that the reason why South Africa has, or is still in the development stage of the certification scheme, is to actually address such matters of the import and export of meat products. because there are already standards at place. But now, if people actually start volunteering to be part of the certification scheme, then it could make the free trade a bit lesser than what it already is. And then we can start to import and export game meat products. Thank you.
Do you want to quickly respond on that? And then can you move the mic to Marco and then to the gentleman at the back?
I don't disagree that standards and that kind of thing can be useful, but if you take an example of foot and mouth disease, any listed disease that goes through the World Organization for Animal Health, South Africa is not currently controlling or applying regionalization and compartmentalization well enough for it to be realistic as a farmer to expect to export in the way that other countries that do embrace this type of thing. So I'm just saying a lot of our problems are South African, but standard and principles and all of these things that we already have these tools. We're not usefully implementing them, is my concern.
Okay. Thank you. Marco, over to you.
Yeah, that is fascinating because intra-African wildlife trade is debated since a long time. Now, where are we with an agreement or with the improvement of existing agreements to remove custom controls and to form a custom union? Because this is what has been done at a later stage in the European Union. It has been done recently in the 90s and with the Maastricht Treaty. So I understand that the East African community is more progressing on this, while the SADC is a little bit behind. Because the first thing to do, my point of view, my opinion, to liberalize trade is to remove custom controls between the country and to form a regional union to have external custom control. But you need to modify or to improve an existing agreement on that. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. If you do so in Africa, you will be a lot facilitated in CITES issues, because you have Article 14 of the Convention, which is exactly this, where the Convention do not apply to these regional economic entities that form a custom union. So, especially Biandri, do you have any idea where we are with this, if there are talks and dialogue in progress and so on? Thank you.
I'm honestly not really sure where that conversation sits at the moment, but despite having a problem with how customs are sometimes administered, from someone that focuses a lot on animal diseases and that kind of thing and the impact in trade, I don't believe we as a continent really have enough monitoring and that type of system to really realistically remove borders as far as, movement of animals and diseases and that type of thing goes. So I would be concerned about that too. Another last comment that I have about why don't we trade in Africa with each other, I think it comes to currency as well. So that's not something that, again, is unique to wildlife or to agriculture, but it explains why a lot of people would rather trade with the EU or with the United States or with China or whoever it might be, is because able to firstly receive money, send money out of the country, and have it.
Okay, so Biandri, maybe still on that, if you have insights a bit into CITES, if we look into these international conventions, for example, Zimbabwe will be allowed to trade on the elephant skin, for example, but for non-commercial purposes. But if you look again, countries like Namibia, they are allowed to trade commercially. So can Zimbabwe send its skin to Namibia and then Namibia takes it out for trade? It's something to think about. And then there is
which is frowned upon. Being able to do it and being allowed to do it are two different things.
Okay, so there is a hand and then I come to Jeremy. Okay, Jeremy, go first.
Comment on opening borders and trade between animals between borders. I'm just speaking from Namibia, which has banned the import of certain non-native high-value species, one of them being Javas. I know they still allow sable to trade, but that's possibly for different reasons. But just wondering where concern for inter-animal trade should lie, whether it should be in promoting industry and the growth of the sector, because, you know, I think live breeders in Namibia would like some more genetic diversity, but the reason for for the ban apparently is to limit non-native species being brought into Namibia. So I'm just wondering where concern should lie, whether we should be looking to grow the industry or whether we should be trying to restrict non-native species being traded into different countries.
Mbaiwa, do you want to respond to that? And then you can also move the mic.
Yeah. Maybe before I get into the question, I should answer your question why Africa is not trading amongst Africa. Why are we not doing it ourselves? When you look into issues of wildlife, and wildlife is such that countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia, even Kenya, Tanzania, the first market was the photographic tourism and the trophy hunting industry. So people were coming for photographic tourism and for trophy hunting. And where were those people coming from? They were not from Africa. They were mostly from outside Africa, mainly Europe, mainly the US. So we started viewing wildlife as photographic and trophy hunting products. The end result is that we actually ignored the other parts of the trade within the animals that we have. So we started looking for the dollars she was talking about, the euros, the pounds that she was talking about, the issue of currency. We did not bother about the Botswana pula, the Zambian kwacha, or what. So to us, we simply believed that wildlife trade involves people coming from Europe, people coming from the Americas to come and view the wildlife or to come and hunt. And we forgot other parts of the wildlife economy. So that is one of the reasons why really trade is not taken care of between Africans. Back to the Mupani when we were talking about, the regulations between Botswana and South Africa, Botswana and Zimbabwe are very, very slim. And you might not even get a paper for that.
So in other words, the law doesn't understand insects.
But back to his question, on the issue of trade, non-native species. Yes, what I know is that whether it's wildlife or it's a plant, if it's coming from another country, we view that with a lot of suspicion. And countries would not want to have that coming into their countries without much information. And again, you look at governments in our region. Governments in our region, they are a bit different from governments in Europe, governments in the US, where they will really get scientific evidence to bring it at the table. A political decision will overrule maybe even a scientific evidence when it is there. Yeah, so that is one of the problems that are there. Even if you were to trade a Mopani worm and it doesn't do any harm to another country, they will simply say, we are not allowing it until we have this. And somebody political will have to come and pronounce that it's okay before it's allowed. So it creates a bit of a problem between us in Africa when it comes to issues of trade. Be it a plant, be it a what, or an animal, whatever, it's a challenge.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, but I'll just give one last hand, just in a minute, so that you can comment for the panel. Then I'll ask them to give closing remarks. I know that I'm now standing between you and the reception to officially welcome you to the Winelands.
Thanks.
Yes.
I just think if we'd called it a special panel on legalizing intra-African wildlife trade, I'd understand it a little bit better, because there's huge intra-African trade in meat, in wild animals, everything. It's just not legal. So I think we need to understand that and realize that, if we could legalize it, we might have better control over it or whatever. So I think that's one aspect, and we must not underestimate its value. It is very big. And I would contend from my personal involvement that it is far, far exceeds the legal trade, not by a little bit, by a lot. And no problem with currency. It's all paid in USD. And then the other thing I'd just like to add is that I think we completely underestimate not well-intended interference from non-African countries onto our trade. And the World Health Organization, which now the OIE falls under as vets, I think there's no doubt in the world that veterinarians outside of Africa are the #1 killers of any trade and conservation at all. We just talked about foot and mouth disease. It is hogwash. It is total hogwash. It is just used to block African meat products going into Europe. That's it. We know the science is there. We can trade it. There's no risk. There's nothing. It is just used as a trade block. So I don't think we must be naive and try to think as if, oh, we just need to change the law. They don't want to change the law. They don't want to make it easier. And each one of those European or American influences within Africa are the ones preventing us trading within Africa. So the sooner Africa can stand for itself, we will solve these problems. There's not one African leader or person I've dealt with in any African country that doesn't believe and understand that there's a value in trading between each other and just do it illegally because the rest of the world doesn't make it easy enough.
Thank you very much. I think that will be our last closing question. I'm just wondering which product are you actually involved in selling informal? But that is okay. I see continentally, we are also seeing movements towards trying to build more laws that can do trade. Just as a closing remarks, for example, we have now the SADC Wildlife-Based Economy Strategy. I know not of any other anyway in the region, so SADC seems to be leading in that space. Can such initiatives at regional level be a stepping stone towards achieving inter-Africa trade? Just a 1 minute reflection, and then
yes, it can work for SADC. You actually look at what is happening in Europe at the moment. They want to ban some imports from whether Africa or wherever it comes from. It's like almost all those countries are going to do that. Starting from the UK, they're going to ban these imports. So you can see that they're a block and they agree that this should be done. Why can't we do it here to say this is what we want to promote as Africa and we want this to be done? On his question of illegal trade being developed, well, I don't have much information about that one, but I think it can be maybe if one of us can have 2 or 3 students researching on that, even though we know it's going to be difficult to get the data, but we can do something.
Thank you. And we are willing to host that student. Biandri?
Botswana is currently banning fruit and vegetables from South Africa. Yeah. So protectionism is a game that we all play, but you can't start operating, and protectionism kills business.
Yeah.
And in the end, if we're not making money out of something, we're not funding anything. So I fundamentally disagree with the idea of, banning European products. I mean, we South Africa, this is a whole different discussion, but is quite controversial in its behavior surrounding chicken, pork, that kind of thing. So it's not as if South Africa doesn't also sit on the wrong side of protectionism sometimes. Your question about legislation, additional, that type of thing. My philosophy is any regulation, any legislation that is written should have a significant qualitative aspect. Speak to the people that this is regulating before you start writing the regulation. Don't write it and then ask for comment. And I think that is I see a couple of heads shaking. I think that is a common problem, is we develop strategies, we develop legislation, standards, that kind of thing. And it's not fit for purpose because you didn't speak to the people it's supposed to be regulating, and sometimes trying to fix a wheel that wasn't, or something that wasn't broken, or inventing a problem that's not really the biggest problem when there are other concerns to address first.
Thank you very much, Biandri. Okay.
No, I was going to say we've got a lot of good qualitative researchers in this country. It's not like we don't have the resources.
Thank you so much. Can I give you to give your last reflection?
Sure. Yes. So, yeah, I think the African Union, there was a high-level panel last year that was discussing CITES and CBD. And I think it's clear from there that there's acknowledgement that unless we fix cross-border monitoring, the skills of people that are meant to be monitoring and regulating these commodities crossing borders, that it's going to be problematic to have this free trade that is sustainably managed. Now, I think when it comes to legislation, I think there are lots of laws in place already, but I think maybe we need to assess which ones are working and which ones are being implemented correctly. I know when we looked at the cross-border timber trade moving into Zambia, that we found that the permits were often not valid, and so I think this is a case of officials needing to know what they're looking at and how to do something about that. How to identify the species that are crossing borders. I think identification is a key issue. If you don't know what timber you're looking at, you don't know what CITES appendix it's on. And with so many new CITES listings coming along, I think there's an appeal from the African Union that we need to build those skills and equip the nationals of all the African states with that knowledge so that they can monitor and regulate better. Because at the end of the day, it's about sustainability. I don't think we're after more regulation. We must just make what we've got work better.
Thank you very much.